There's a chair there, and there's 3 more in the back.
Next to me. I'm there.
All right.
If I'm tired, I'll rest.
Great. Okay, just watch yourself there.
I will.
Welcome. It's wonderful to have you all here, new, old. I want to just briefly start out. Those of you who were here for Mark's reading a couple of months ago now already, right? God, the fall is flying by. I wanted to start with a poem, and I spent the morning looking for another poem by this writer to read, and ended up deciding that the one I had found for your reading is the one that I really should read. So let me start with this. First thing this morning after coffee. Mark this for reference, lovelorn blender of midnight color in every unstable gender, beguiling multiple reflections from a variety of mirrors, gilded, gothic, pocket. Listen. There are children raised by wolves who never learn to speak, who discern in your words only the meat of your breath. Shifts in perception shatter all vessels to splinters. No one escapes this generation with immortality untarnished. Fragments invade the bloodstream through soles of the feet, lodged dangerously in the porches of your heart, bearing bits of the message in a bottle you dropped into what seemed an infinite sea, now found to be small, circular, and not particularly blue. Your own words with no redeeming context. That's Robert Hunter, lyricist for the Grateful Dead, who we lost earlier this fall. He was a wonder, and if you haven't found his lyrics and his poems, and the Grateful Dead, but I mean, his lyrics were just different and extraordinary, and I decided, since the influence he had on my poetry is we all poked our heads out in 1968, 69, and people were saying, what are your influences when we were hauled off to colleges for readings when I was in high school? We were holding up the lyrics to Dark Star. What's that? This is poetry that's coming out now, So the season is dedicated to Robert Hunter, and I just wanted to start by reading that. A little business. Next reading up is Ms. Collins, who will be coming in here on December 8th. I keep thinking it's the 10th because that's Emily's birthday. It's the Emily Dickinson birthday weekend memorial reading. And what that's for is back when I started, and the first reading was with Bill Corbett and Garrett Lansing, I wanted to, as part of the series, be doing a survey of the people that, as I came into consciousness in Boston, were the people that were surrounding me that had a deep, deep keel to them, that were doing work that was just pushing me around and influencing so many other people that I didn't even know or weren't in my camp or whatever. And so each year we've concentrated on one particular poet, and this year you're up. And I'll explain more when I get to introduce her next month, but I'm really looking forward, and I really am so happy you're coming in. Anybody else got anything? You've got stuff going on, I know, don't you, I think, at the Girl Ear?
Right.
You know dates?
No, we just go check the website,
Okay.
www.girlieproject.org.
But there's all sorts of
But
lovely,
we are
lovely
also
things.
launching spoKe on December 12th.
Right.
I mean, not launching it, this is the launch, but
No,
It's the second one.
it's
It's a
the
review.
second one.
It's going under review.
Yeah, this is the
So-
spoke reading. That's why it's so
So come
wonderful.
to that
When
on-
you said that, I just smiled. He said, "Let's make it like the Rolling Thunder review," and I was like, "Yes, we will," because that's, of course, back to.
Mad Hat Press on December 8th is a big event. You want to talk about that?
Yes, please.
Well, thankfully after Martha, we start at 4:30, so I think we'll just sort of shave off at the end. We're bringing in Maxine Chernoff from California, Michael Anania from Texas, Bob Archambault from Chicago, Mark Scroggins from New Jersey, and a whole host of Boston poets from Kevin Gallagher to Ben Mazur to David Blair and Stephen Kramer.
Where is this going to be?
It's going to be in Warehouse 11, it's called, in Somerville.
Warehouse 11 in Somerville.
You know where the little park behind the German restaurant is in Union Square.
Right.
Oh, sure.
And there's like the place we can buy like
Where the jungle,
beehive.
where the
You put-
jungle is.
Yeah.
There's a warehouse
Great
space.
Crazy.
Yeah, so it's great. There'll be jazz.
And that's at what
bands and
time?
everything like that.
4:30?
4:30 to 8:30. Also, we have a jazz trio will be playing as well.
Martha, can we
8,
bus
12?
people over from
Yeah,
your?
I'll
The
try
Bill
to,
Bar.
I'll try to get a bus.
Yes?
Next Saturday afternoon at 3:30 at the Parker House in downtown Boston. Martin Espada will be there with people from the anthology he edited, What Saves Us. Let's see, Danielle Legros-George, Doug Anderson, Everett Hoagland, Richard Michelson, Marge Piercy, Robert Pinsky, Lauren Marie Schmidt, and I don't know if anybody else. At the Parker
You're
House.
gonna let us in?
Oh yes, this is a
We'll let you in.
regular event, the school
Fantastic.
street sessions, yep.
Okay, we good? I'll do a brief introduction only. Mr. Gallagher is just one of those astonishing people that I love, who's got his fingers into like seriously different pies, whether it's from, you know, working with the United Nations and helping Washington not completely implode upon itself, to publishing and editing and writing his own poetry. How he does all this, I have no idea. But it's a wonderful, wonderful thing to have him back. This is your second trip in here, I realize. He was here for the reading of Garrett's book a year ago already. And we are looking forward to having him coming in to do his own book here. But I told him when he came in, I wanted to just turn things over to him and let him review his review. So please welcome to this room, Kevin Gallagher.
Thanks, Michael. It's an honor to be here. Michael did ask me to read from my new book called Radio Plays, but I said, you know what, Karina Van Berkem and I, who we're both the editors of spoKe, gosh, November 17th would be a great time to give a self-inflicted deadline to have the new issue of spoKe over. So let's start the spoKe review. So I do have copies of my new book, and I'm happy to share it with you. But don't tell my publisher. It's not this publisher. It's a different publisher. That I'm not a great marketer. I'd rather market all the great poets that we have in the new issue of spoKe. spoKe, this is the new issue of spoKe 6. This is the first time anyone besides Karina or I have seen it, and those of you who corrected the proofs. And up here we have the 6 issues that we've done. We started right after the Boston Marathon bombing, and we've had 3. Our motto comes from Kenneth Rexroth, and it's against the ruin of the world. There is only one defense: the creative act. And there's 3 things that we try to foster in the magazine, either by the poets that we recruit to come into it, and those that we pick, and those that you send to us. And one is a global poetry that engages with or is from the world's places, cultures, and literary traditions, past and present. 2, an American poetry that sees the English language and literary tradition as core, but only one of many routes and paths for poetry. 3, a poetics that attempts to innovate language, idiom, sensibility, and poetic form while maintaining a public presence. And we're happy to be doing this for the 6th time. We, as you can see from the covers, we'd like to pay homage to the past, present, and future of Boston area poetry, and in the tradition of one of the greatest magazines in the history of Boston, if we can claim it to a certain extent, Sid Corman's Origin, which was so great about it, rather than just 2 or 3 poems by Martha Collins or 2 or 3 poems by somebody else, we make sure that we really do a deep dive into someone so you can really get a good idea of who they are and where they're coming from. And in this particular issue, you'll hear from John Mulroney. We've got a whole section of his work. Amanda Cook, who's been writing this long poem in response to the Maximus poems, and Peter Valente, who's been in this room, but he hasn't read it. Yeah, he's done both. We've been publishing 30 pages or so of his translations in the past 4 or 5 issues. This time we had Ovid Love poems, and then Philip Nikolaev, who's a local poet, Russian-American poet. He's translated 20 Russian poems. In addition to these features, so in each issue we have a good 100 pages that just focuses on a handful of people. Then we have just a group of poems, and we have essays and remembrances. Unfortunately, there have been too many people that have been passing away from this tradition that we've been having to remember. One that passed away earlier than the others that we'll mention, who we'll never forget, in part because of Mark, who's here, is Denise Levertov. We have another essay on a series of essays, or a long memoir that he's been doing of her when she was here. We also have a really incredible essay by David Rich about Garrett Lansing, who I guess was the first reader here. Along with Bill Corbett, we have poems by Jim Dunn, Ruth Lepson, Michael Franco, Joseph Torr, and Patrick Pritchett, all about not about or just reflecting on Bill's death, and also a great essay by James Cook, one of the Gloucester poets, about Sam Cornish, who also left us last year. But we pay homage to the past, but make sure that we have a great foundation for the future, and that's what will bring you the living today. We have 4 poets with us today. Chloe Garcia Roberts, his daughter. Those of you who exclusively came here, will give you extra bread, more wine, and all your money back, because her daughter's a little sick today, so she can't make it today. I'm sorry that Chloe couldn't join us. Please allow me to introduce my co-editor, Karina Van Berkom. She's going to introduce our first poet.
Hello, my name is Karina, and I don't enjoy speaking in front of people. But Kevin is very good at it, and I will introduce our first poet of the day. Allison VANOUSSE is a PhD candidate in the Editorial Institute at Boston University. She lives in Cambridge, and she is a wonderful person who was instrumental in spoke 4 and 5, I believe. She did huge work on the Bunny Lang issue. 4?
Just 4.
Just 4?
Yeah.
All right, well, maybe your spirit was in 5. She was instrumental in the Bunny Lang stuff, and was a pleasure to work with, and I love her work, so please welcome Allison VANOUSSE.
Textual note. Marcia shaved her back to write a poem, to give to her friend Edward, the musician. Crystal told him once when they were stoned, and Penny said that it was a condition. Marcia finished after several days, and followed Edward to his new hotel room. Edward poked her there in different ways and kicked her pocketbook and broke her cell phone. Tricia had called Penny. Crystal texted from her Buddhist retreat on a ranch in West Texas. But Marcia left the hotel in a daze. She'd never shown her poetry before. And Edward blew his nose and found a trace of Marcia's back hair glistening in the loogie on the floor. Occasional. In a garden, nothing comes in straight. The terrain is lumpy and the rose's weight assaults the trellis. Nights it creaks with dew where I went walking in the dark to sit the hours with you. I was afraid of anything at all. Of the changing weather, of the changing leaves that choose high summer for a dying fall, of all the city alleys of the heart. In a garden we were passing through a gallery of roses, a conspiracy of voices, till we arrived at choices 1 and 2. To let the tryst grow common and ignore the sting, or amaze Venus and accept a ring. Since there's a little more time because Chloe isn't here, I am going to read one of the Bunny Lang poems, which is a new discovery occasioned by spoke from her papers at Houghton Library, wonderful Houghton Library, which has all of Bunny's wonderful things.
Can you tell folks a little bit about that section?
Absolutely. So Bunny Lang, poet of the 50s, champion of the Poets Theatre of Cambridge, and a wonderful playwright, as well as a figure within the New York School of Poets before they transferred to New York from Harvard.
Well, I like that.
Bunny Lang is a very special person. There are terrific statements about her life and work within spoke 4, largely brought about by Kevin's immense connections to the world of poetry in general. But what I'm going to read today is a version of a poem that didn't appear in her posthumous volume of poems called Pitch, edited by her. husband, Bradley Phillips. Another poem actually wound up bearing this title, but this is called Death of Another Swan. To die out of debt was a last stand, but somewhere the outpost of a father in Tucson, blind, angry, married to his kitchen radio, and the gossipy neighbors who would have caught the post, some meddler would have come into her room, discovered the awful secret written the meddling letter. She had a panicked vision of animals beating about the nettles and weeks snarling and howling just outside the wire enclosure. In Florida, the weeds are full of snakes. But she was never any further from the cold mountains or her birth on an Illinois farm than a dead sleep after losing the races, or after losing a man who could have been good to her if she had waited. Muddied at noon at the hotel bar alone, she did not live there. She came to hear the noise at lunchtime in the cabanas nearby, looking at the bar telephone as if, she having left messages at her rooming house, it would ring for her at any minute to say, "Come, I will give you everything. Now that you asked, everything that I refused." She stared Blow's focus at the collection agencies and the finance company and the pink convertibles that cruise Collins from dawn to dawn with salvation in them, wearing tropical shirts and the smiles of the victorious, always ready to stop at the red light and say, "Going my way? Hello, beautiful," or just "get in," to glimpse salvation over the inevitable discussion of means, or as it weighs, or the simplest statement of kinds of pleasures, the trembling visions of angels' faces red-rimmed turning to snouts, eyes pinpointing and the cheeks swollen out, or one scream in the dark on a boarding house bed, having woken from dreaming of a pig's backside, where the smiling cashier had been stripping for action, his hands trembling, his eyes bright with love. She told the bartender, "I've been sick," and slipped from her stool, from her stalk like a cracked stem when the wind is blowing, and the monster bloom was not staked. He knew her. "You've been borrowing money." She was ready to steal, but not clever like the others, and he stared at her sadly. She looked so pretty that day, they had all laughed, when she picked herself off the floor and dazzled at them, giggling with the happy fatuity and absence of blame one goes into bars to find, the peace, the concord. An arm seized her brown, hard 40-year-old skin and helped her. "Smiley, what for you grease the seats here? You are among friends," the dizzied room said. A glass stem, fresh and cool, came down the bar from her. The gentleman at the end would like the blonde to join him. The wind trembled with lilies and jasmine, some sound water running bright, the old nearby in the ladies' room. She shuddered with the effort, but tied around her the mink stole that was her beautiful affirmation. The tropical plants leaned to her in their stands, buried in lavender freeforms from their places cut out by the decorator in the beige wall-to-wall carpet, and she heard them, tender, more tender than the palms, which hiss and breathe at night like users of narcotics who are sleeping. The other thing that I wanted to read, which is not by me, is from this terrific book by a contemporary of Bunny's whose name is Salem Slobodkin. She died in 1964. This is a posthumous volume of her poetry from 1965, brought into being by her teacher and friend Bill Alfred with one of these lovely Frank Parker illustrations for the cover. The poem I'm going to read here is called Love's Alternate, or Love's Alternate. I'm not sure how I should pronounce this. The youth game has been stubbornly pupped done. The naked eye no longer sees the visible, but sees it as too beautiful. Good and bad years have settled the face and temperament into cracks, the body into a less powerful morality. A melancholy subdues the sky's unwieldy tenets, and darkness again frightens like an irony the ponderous attempts, the putting on airs which could flutter a desert cactus. Uncritical admirations have lost their fun, or being uncritical perhaps have more. You dare look down your nose behind the noblest aims, or turn it up at what depravities produce and copy the great masters, as if their solutions, their black and white obsessions would be yours. Go blast your talents through an oil refinery. Already you count your knowledge on an abacus where real humility demands that it value the laundry. The counterest know-how stands in debt to the vigorous figuring that an arrogant man and woman have been tricked, confusing the questions they raise and squanderly sending their shirts to the salvation of the artistic intellect. Satisfied visions and inspirations are an old man's memories which unroll their dazed, deluged human scrolls of mediocre adventures. A popular heroism before the TV cameras, may only affirm itself over a weak individuality of a stupid national type. The risks of analog make war, and the black fears of death, like psychic rediscoveries, wreak the ornery tyrants of grandeur when ugliness draws near. Do I have time to read one of mine? Yeah. These are the ones by me that are in spoKe this time. They're based on creative misinterpretations of a book from the 19th century by Richard Shevnick's Trent called The Study of Words. Compelled to adopt the language of the conquered, or after a while that which may be called a transaction. There are causes for the existence of synonyms, reaching back far into the history of a nation, here to possess its own idiom, fire for the hearth. One word for one word, the same thus in Greek were originally elect in the midst of their differences, nay, being few in number, both in forms sufficiently different for the quintessential surrealist encounter. They were found in feeling of processes very different from, much less formal come religious acceptable forms of the same thing. Various tribes, each with its own dialect, having fixed themselves into one people. The latter class, which are originally themselves, being but few in number, find themselves compelled at last to name that season autumn, like spring. Finesse is French. There are causes of language, but other causes at a later period are also at work. When a written literature, having its own good and expressive omission, lying necessary and without distinction on the veritable kitchen table of integers, is imposing their languages merely onto two slightly different appropriations, one, succus for amber, two, esteem from abroad, we find that is how it always is in England, and oftentimes luxuries rather than necessities look goodly and expressive from the ambiguous citizenship of their first proposer. For instance, the Latin, having its own import, these are enough, as a single illustration of the various quarters from which the existing words are adjusted. These are a language. They enumerate the various candidates for admission from a sufficiently different foyer. So our dialectic became, to beat embarrassment, farce. For complicating what was formerly simpler, the body in which congruence and cross-reference none dispute, 3 persons and 3 numbers in a variety of modes and tenses, gradual and conscious, cumbrous, complicated, formerly simpler. We contrast this with our modern tenses. On the other hand, the gradual sound change, quickly, slowly, the Old English quickly losing derivational complexities, the Latin mente, for with a mind, slowly coming to be used as a suffix in the same sense. Even here, word expresses the tense. This came to be expressed by separate words. I am writing. I was writing. English shows us its cases from Sunday to Sunday, under more interesting aspects when you have taught it to corrupt epistle and gospel. Listen to them and address yourselves to the explanations. In the spirit of human society, we come to designate the Word of God. Our present restriction of the word to one book, profitably learned from the addition of personality, affirms the daily lessons with a sense of kingship like Joseph's kingly sheaf, to which all other kings' obeisance was a mark of something I am not permitted to see. The father, veiling the children with dishonest hands, could exist without a territorial jurisdiction. If I was sad to notice, for instance, that the seasons had changed no form of recognition, but only the weight and intrinsic value of sunlight, viz. The social conditions of England, when the rudimental germs that made it glorious and great were first issued, words may have shown how the present links itself even to remotest past, and what is now past to present. It was merely eating jam tarts. It was an anti-scriptural system. Thank you.
Well, thanks a lot, Allison, for reading both from the Bunny Lang and from your own work. We're really excited to have some of Allison's poems in spoKe 6. And in spoKe 4, you can't give me any of the credit. She guest edited a 150-page investigation of Bunny's work. She went to the Harvard Archive and has lots of posthumous work that had never been published before, letters and also an unpublished play that we have in there. I've got copies of just about every one of them
Photos as well.
with me here, and there's some great photos in there, and some sketches by Edward Gorey that are in there as well. Someone else who has been in now his second issue of spoKe is our next reader, Mark VINCENZ. He's hard to keep up with. He just handed me yet another book. This one from Salmon Poetry called "Here Comes the Night Dust." He was in spoKe 3. Four. He was also in spoKe 4 with some translations from the Swiss and also some of his own poetry. Today you can read all of that, any of that, none of that, or whatever you like. In addition to Night Dust, let's see, what did you tell us about yourself for this? In addition to Night Dust, he is he's published 14 books. I wasn't lying. He's published 14 books of poetry, including more recently "Becoming the Sound of Bees," which is a great book, "Leaning into the Infinite," "The Syndicate of Water and Light," and "Here Comes the Night Dust," which I've got right here. He translates from the German, Romanian, and French. He didn't mention the Swiss, which we have there. And he's won a number of awards. He's also the publisher of Mad Hat Press, which I'm proud to have a book with. Mark VINCENZ.
Do you mind if can I move this forward?
You can do anything you want. Yes.
I like to feel like I'm on some sort of tribunal. These poems that are published in spoKe are all from my book that I'm working on at the moment, called "At the Surface." A kind of watery journey through consciousness, a journey that has a beginning and has an end, or does it have an end? Or is it just a cyclical journey that we all go along? And many of these poems have epilogues or prologues. Here in the islands, no bold proposals or the hissing frenzy of afternoons and evenings in the metropolis. Among the machines of virtue and vice. Dare I say, the labyrinth was in her mind, the path memorized like those choral verses she had known from childhood. She glanced down toward the assembled, hoping somehow she too might impart what she knew. A lifetime had taught her a little less than half, and it reflected in her laughter, which was strained at best. She imagined him as a lighthouse in a maelstrom of cross-currents, of unpredictable shallows. It was pure tomfoolery, of course, thinking of her own symbolic discoveries as to the illuminations, a faint roar that murmured deep in her inner ear that seemed to say, "Something wants to be known." To her, though, words meant little anymore. Electric, though, the channels of runoff that twist through the once primordial forest, and the smoke emerging from funnels, spilling out words on the sky. Please don't die. Calm consideration requires just the margins of a newspaper, something dragged under the noses of authorities in their paralyzing pinstripes. Who lectures on death anyway? It's all about the dying, or those stasis chambers frozen cryogenic in the chorus of the patriarch, the wind that bellows in its incontinent rain, or Sister Snail in her slow skate across the melting ice of uneven waters. Present is this island, the cracking face of a perpetual cold. We remember her still, even though all the dark clouds in her ancient tiles, when people were carried by a wave through their generous ghettos and found their fates along the barriers of truth. Could we walk along the alleys singing, waving our masks among the machines of virtue and vice, spreading our salt fondly, where we all walk intrepid in a curved space. Eventually, the cold will hit her eyes, and just for a second she shall see her other face, boldly clearing the way down to the waterfront. Foliage and forest, the heart of the land, silence and sentience, the soul of the sea. And this one's for John Ashbery. Once I thought I had found the metaphysical substance. Gold. Here we go again. Barely tolerated and living on the margins. Pollen sinking in a breeze. Popular and peopled like a sneeze. The returning ones like a cloud dreaming. Like an old joke retold. Suffering the glow of growing dull. Don't you wonder why through all this, giving way to elbows and tears, corruption survives, hell thrives, and models everything on old deals? Tomorrow, they say, will be purer, more radiant, and we will soar higher on stolen wings. The small hours, the angle of shadow upon your earthly thigh, that bristling near white, follicles that raise themselves when I touch the back of your hand, a primordial creature responding to a brief change in temperature, a glistening of light on a still water surface, deep in the metaphor of unearthly love. Is it that I yearn for a gentle immersion? A brew, concocted where love was just yesterday, vague to me, yet an image made in a hotel room. That form of days turned into years. The end, so it began. Don't say anything at all. Simply watch the outline of the trees and the clouds restlessly clutching the cold light. This one's called One Man's Northampton. And I wrote it on the spot when I came out of hospital. Some of you know that I've been in hospital this year. It's been pretty rough. And I'm just getting there. But I wrote it just when I got out of hospital, and I met a poet friend of mine in Northampton. So yeah, here's how it goes. No matter what, gallant. A word he rubbed between his hands to keep warmer. So, he tells me. So, he says, tell me. Oh, you know what it's like to die. How does it really feel? In times like these, the voice fails. A crackle. Still twisting the dial the way we once tuned in and out. To die or be dead? Not yet, I say, hands behind my back, contemplating and complaining to themselves. A grumble. As he applauds me, the cigarette just lit falls from his lips. The ash burns a hole in his shirt. Meanwhile, above, the sky, all dark clouds, gathers itself to wait out the night. Somehow, it floats more easily by. Forewarning. From the myth, which has no end, but is always transforming, from the theft of fire to the pursuit of a loved one in the city of the dead. Thus salvation from the flood, or the deep search for eternal life, where we are surrounded by ourselves rather than the world, missing the patterns of thought behind words. From this unlighted cabin window, the air unhooks itself and darts away. Silent prayer for my mother, Angela, who passed away 2 years ago. How can I expect you to climb out of your grave and creep through your old haunts, to stand beside me and point out who walks like a martyr and who walks like a rose? Your millions set adrift in conveys headed to the edge of death, the moon above and below, quantum illusions, figurative or literal expressions of what is to come and who is to haunt us. Winding down the track, the countryside path taken by all those countless souls. How bitter the taste of this breeze. And finally, a trip to the moon. Mortality, a faint whisper, a life permanent. Moonless in thought, tidal though, to unfield the even pasture, newly hewn to an old man's rubble. The greys, the insolent weeds unwinding, the threat of what wants to be bread or corn, the lost cattle stymied, the rest wishing to be forlorn, to be missing out, like the crone inside the daft hut, raised above the hills, with the last glass of wine, heady, but headed backward into the motion, uneven and solitary, quivering into latter days, or trains ricketing, crickets hopscotching, clambering deep into the roots, under earth, into the lost time of anywhere, of adventure, of jungle spirit, of subsumed, the enraptured, until more graves, discovering this planet in a lucky commotion, a crackling of static, that background radiation, a thought from the beginning of time. Here we stand, caught adrift, planting flags, clutching at straws, to forget all bets and land seamlessly on the face of a cartoon. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. I always love hearing your poetry, especially read by you, because it reminds me of a grand Shakespeare performance, which I appreciate very much. So our next reader is Michael Schemmerhorn, who is, Kevin is wonderful to work with in that he says, who would you like to see in the magazine, which is really fun for me because I get to think about, poets that I think I'd like to see and other people would like to see, and I thought of Michael immediately because I love his work, and I've read and loved much of his work. He was a student of mine, and I often have sort of a litmus test for some students, which is a poem that I read by Anna MacDonald called Horse Piano. And I knew Michael was special when I read Horse Piano and finished the last line, and Michael gasped loudly and sort of clutched his breast. And I said, he gets it. So I'm thrilled that he's in this issue, and I will now read his credits here. Michael Schemmerhorn is a poet who lives in Boston, Mass. He's currently working on his first book-length poetic study in material culture, queer artistry, and memory. His poems have previously appeared in Boink, December, and the Pen Review. Please welcome my friend Michael.
I chose a horrible seat to sit. Okay. Hi. I'm gonna sit like this dramatically. Maybe not.
No one sat in the chair. You can sit in the
Maybe
chair.
I will. Maybe that'll be
It's
my
the
drama.
comfy chair.
Well, hi everyone. Thanks so much for having me. I am gonna read just 4 because I'm so desperately indecisive, but these were the 4 that I kind of landed on and felt good. They're all, 2 of them are in spoke 6. They're all included in my first book called Cinema. It currently just exists as a PDF on my laptop. The only acclaim it has is a boatload of rejections, but I do consider that an acclaim because it's what fuels the fire and keeps us going, right? The first poem I'm going to read is in spoke 6. It came to be after actually a conversation between Karina and my dear friend Ran, and then it kind of turned into a whiskey-induced fever dream, and then it turned into this. It's about the movie Twister. And to be clear, this tank top on my arm, tattooed permanently, is Helen Hunt's white tank top that she wears in the film. So here we go, let's just launch in. In the 1996 film Twister, Helen Hunt wears a white tank top. And so the credits roll and we weep. Not for the death of a father, the love story, or the leveled drive-in featuring Jack Nicholson's axe and Shelley Duvall's scarlet face, but for our Oklahoma, the savage trail from Springfield to Worcester. It was as if someone had folded a world map to let the belly of the Midwest press itself against the cheek of the Northeast, crushed the hydrangea plants flat in the crease. After the Twister, everything had a certain glow to it. Our house, a swollen monster, a cicada that swallowed the sun. The sky yellow like mustard seed or saffron, up to our knees in light, every type of it. The days lasting all night, the tourists photographing the damage because the damage, some of the most astounding sculpture I'd ever seen. My mother thought differently. In the aftermath, she peered through the mist, then grabbed the broomstick, worked to brush the pine needles into a small pile, choked on the vapor rising from the driveway toward that stark sky. And later that night she must have thought of the birds and the bugs because I heard her muffled sob stuffed into the hay-filled mattress on the daybed in the neighbor's basement, a home while ours unbuilt. She cleaned like that even before the storm, on Sundays, about once a month, sweating through a white tank top, rewarding herself with a vodka on ice, like all heroes do. This one's about my ex-boyfriend. Canines. One night while in grade school, I sat with my knees tucked to the tickle in my throat. Atop a wicker bar stool, I recoiled at the teething dog leaping to nab my toes. I was afraid of her playground fangs, of the imagined puncture wounds. Now, early 20s, you find me with my knees pulled halfway to my armpits, a pink pen dangling from my bottom lip. We're in the park, so when you try to feed a squirrel, I pin your arms to the spoke of your bike and wonder if it's a fear of something wild or something that looks too close to something like me. I have hair on my chest. I clear my throat in the morning. We try antiquing, and stuck in the market traffic, we dig for cash to pay the parking fare. You, in admission, pull a 3x4 graying photograph from the folds of your wallet. His name was Harry. He held a chew toy in his mouth. And this is the way we love, preserved, caught in a relic, not teething, but a mouth filled with calcium and so much air, leaping from every angle. This is a fun one. I wore my skeleton earring today, so I thought I would read this. It's from Cinema. My favorite film, other than Twister, is The Exorcist. Yeah, my brain is on a really cool plane. So I wrote this poem imagining myself as the character in The Exorcist, but also as the exorcist. So it's called Auto-Exorcism. And it's, bear with me, it's really hard to read because it looks like this. So, I might choke a little bit. Auto-exorcism. He, as priest, reports back instantly. Speaks like a coroner's report. 22-year-old male, partially charred remains, scar extending from left earlobe to bottom lip. Had the skin of an onion. It peeled back and the choir wept. He pissed the bed and changed the sheets just to piss again. He got it on the carpet the second time around, but wasn't exorcised for that. Not even for pulling the knife out of his nose. Instead, we had leaned in close, listening for a heartbeat. The only note, a goat's bleat, as if stuck, screaming with its hooves cut off. And the last one is written after, like, you know, the tradition of writing after someone, but also for my dear friend Bianca Stone, granddaughter of Ruth Stone. She lives in Vermont. She's an incredible, incredible poet. She is the reason that I didn't quit poetry in college. I read this one poem by her called Les Miserables. I think it was in the Sync Review. And I read that at a very low time in my life, and I was like, okay, like, this is what I want to be. So this poem, it's featured in spoke 6. It closes my book. It's very dear to me because it was written for Bianca. It's called Misery. Somewhere like liberty, I am grinding my head through a washboard and collecting the debris. You are hiding in the kitchen. You are pushing ice cubes from a silicone tray. Of course, I've a beer in hand, a pocket of yeast collecting at the bottom like the dunes in the desert feature on BBC One. You notice my knack for details. You notice my hand on your thigh, and of course that's an excuse for a hangover. I think of you asking, how are you doing 1,296,608 times a day? And how I always think to half joke, suffering, and you laugh every time. You make sure I fail to note the misery in that. I make sure to note my own hyperbole. What I am trying to say is that we existed worlds apart, but never cared to notice. What I am actually saying is that I did love you then, but now I'm speculating again, and I almost forget your middle name. Together, we are a gruff man leaning hard with his hip against the hood of a pickup truck, the sunshine feeling more like sand coating our swollen throat. It's days like this you tell me about your fear of the word different, how waking up next to another man feels more like a handful of holy dirt thrown over your moon-glow forehead. On the hood of the pickup, or inside and draped across the upholstered seat covers, I tell you my vision of heaven. A world where we are caked in light and coffee grounds, and straight people are relegated to the pleather-stitched booths at the rear of an Outback steakhouse. Our skin is clear. You are looking like a hero. You are a dog and I am too sometimes. Since we are in heaven, we no longer require ladders. And since we are in heaven, we don't have to mourn like this. Thanks.
Thank you. That's great stuff. You can find more poems in spoke 6. Like in the Bunny Lang issue, I also I've got a couple copies of spoke 3. Mark mentioned John Ashbery. John Ashbery said the one poet in the United States that ever moved anything beyond Eliot and Pound is John Brooks Wheelwright, who was a Boston poet who only published 2 books. He was killed by a drunk driver on the corner of Mass Ave and Beacon at the young age of 43. His collected poems are published by New Directions, but we unearthed some stuff that wasn't published before, and a number of people wrote essays about him. Want to point that one out. And then the last one, spoke 5, we have a great, almost 100-page section on Larry Eagner, who's also from the region, lived up in Swampscott. I mentioned Sid Corman before. Larry Eagner was very, very physically impaired and was homeschooled and used to listen to Sid Corman's poetry show on the radio from Swampscott. And they started corresponding. And then Larry was taken to Black Mountain, was seen as one of the core Black Mountain poets, and then moved his later years in the West Coast. We have a lot of posthumous stuff from him, and some essays. And although Karina, at this point, maybe you've recovered from the hangover from it, but if you look at a lot of Larry's books, they're all typed in typed as in with a typewriter. And so we reproduced that font and really,
It's a journey.
really a journey for Karina who lays it out, but it came out spectacular. Our next poet, I was trying to think on the way over here. I met in 1991 when we had both come out with new literary magazines, and we were given a reading at the at TT and the Bears. You were the poetry editor of Paramore, right?
Oh, yeah, I guess so.
Yeah.
I came up with that as well, yeah.
And I had a literary, and we were just coming out with a magazine called Compost. And I met this guy, drank a few beers with him, and I've been really happy and lucky to know him for all this period through many years in renditions. And he's published some great poetry in his time, but really when I thought about, gosh, who should we have next to really spend some time with his work, I really said we really need to have John MULROONEY, because he probably has a PDF or two of a couple books on his hard drive that really need to see the light of day. Let me read what he said about himself. He said he's a poet, a filmmaker, and a musician living in Cambridge, Massachusetts. He's the author of If You See Something, Say Something from the Anchorite Press and co-producer of the documentary film The Peacemaker from Central Square Films. He serves as the poetry editor for Boog City in Manhattan. Brooklyn? Depends on where Sean was at the time, right?
Yeah.
He records and performs regularly with a number of musical groups in the greater Boston area, including Trusty Sidekick. He's an associate professor in the English department at Bridgewater State University. His work has appeared in Fulcrum, Pressed Wafer, Solstice, Battersea Review, Poetry Northeast, spoKe, and Let the Bucket Down. Great local magazine as well. Our last issue, I'll just find this. Where'd you go? Daniel Legros George, who's also in this issue, she was the poet laureate of Boston for 2 or 3 years, and when I asked her, oh, I want to do a feature on somebody who I don't know that well, and she said, oh, out of all the years that I was doing this poet laureate stuff, Audrey Mardavich was one of the most interesting people that I ever met. I thought her work was great, and we featured her in spoKe 5, and when I told Audrey that we were going to do one on John, I had asked Danielle to write the introduction to Audrey, and Audrey volunteered to write the introduction for John. And so that's what he said about himself that we have in the bio. If I may, I'm going to read what she says about him. She says, John MULROONEY is a poet, teacher, musician, filmmaker, and archivist with a documentarian sensibility. In this collection of poems that you'll find in spoKe, set in the cultural political landscape of the U.S. under the regime of Donald Trump, we find a poet attempting to create order in a world on the brink of collapse. Within these poems is the desperate search for something to grasp onto, only finding, quote, the occasional, the elliptical, the scattered, that of which I cannot speak, which is nevertheless what I remember, end quote. Nevertheless, MULROONEY digs deep into the chaos, untethering himself from time, place, history, mood, consciousness, leaving us untethered as well, but trusting and curious enough to come with. MULROONEY shepherds us through history as we meet the ghost of a Harvard economist and ghosts of Confederate soldiers that lead us along the Natchez Trace. There are cracked cars and abandoned ships. A man in a flat black hat, quote, comes along to tell us that the world is one thing and that there is no way to make it any other. It is unnerving. It is bleak. We have stumbled into an eerily familiar darkness. It is 2019 in the United States, after all, a world of, quote, motion of matter, deep particularizing into the indiscernible, a smashing of idle, a filtering of photons, a Heraclitean stream of bullets. Even little Baron Trump wishes he was dead. We time travel to the Civil War, to the day of Liu Xiaobao's death, occupy Wall Street, from the US to China, Ireland to Senegal, Boston to Nashville, Shanghai to Gloucester. MULROONEY writes, I was from where I was from until I was from somewhere else. In a time full of checkpoints, walls, and cages, the poet is free to roam, to ask what we might do when we aren't seeking credit for merely becoming awake. Amongst all of the hallucinatory poetics are poems deeply rooted in MULROONEY's lived experience. Having known John for many years, I would be remiss not to mention that he is one of the most active members of the creative communities to be part of. I bet you've seen this guy and this wonderful woman at every poetry reading in town. Many of the poems are for or in conversations with his poetic comrades. His presence as a listener, an organizer, and documentarian of the places that artists, poets, and musicians congregate informs all of his work. In the stunning, quote, lines composed on Amtrak after hearing Garrett is Gone, which we publish here, MULROONEY writes of the passing of the great poet and his dear friend Garrett Lansing. We are transported, given a celestial respite, with the ecstatic call to arms, quote, see the light, the other light is come to join your light, another world illuminated. It is very worth trusting in MULROONEY as guide through the wreckage. The map may be tattered, but he has found one. We are not as lost as we once thought we were. John MULROONEY.
Michael, thank you for your drama. I think you've made it easier for me to choose the seat.
It's very comfortable.
Right? Yeah, it's just like,
I have to
like,
say.
when the first two were like not sitting down, I think I'm not gonna, but I just figure like flipping pages. That's so wonderful from Audrey. I have no idea who she's talking about. I think we were in the Plow and Stars, right, when you first told me that you were going to do spoke. And, like that was, I don't know how many years ago that was. But that's, here we are, spoke 6, which is great to be part of. I'm kind of with Elizabeth Bishop on footnotes, the fewer of them the better, and that they're pretty much always in the way. But then I always write things and I think, I should probably tell someone what that is. Pareidolia is when we see shapes, we see faces and shapes, right? Like when people see, Jesus in their soup or something like that. I don't really know what a gnome hog is, and that will become kind of apparent. But they're like they're both ships, but they also are sort of ancient Celtic gods, or maybe ancient Celtic gods or something like that. And part of this is on a place called Apple Island.
John, what's the word again?
Gnome hog.
Gnome hog.
Gnome hog. Yeah, I mean it's a word in early Irish for ship, but it also is a certain kind of idol that seems to have been being worshipped even as late as the early 20th century. But a lot of that's maybe legendary. Pareidolia. Faces in the hedgerow appear in the late dusk. The muddy green darkens, reveals fluid smiles, placid anguishes, quivers of faces, hardly faces. The light lighting out, a question unanswered, a darkness revealed. The ruddy face of dusk fading to the nothing burger of darkness. Darkness beneath the dusk above the wreckage of a pickup truck at the mouth of the abandoned village, and its wreckage that has graduated to ruin. Blank pedestals covered in lichens and moss, the gnome hogs absent, smashed with missionary zeal as far as we can discern. A face in darkness is itself darkness soon enough. A mouse in a humane trap makes little plastic sounds in a dusk that reveals this day like any other, slipping into a different like any other, a like any other you thought you knew the day you took a different mouse humane into the landfill as a benevolent god. The slate blue clouds, a panther with a third eye, a tray of figs and lemons, a nest of cobalt eggs or ritual stones, a copse of trees ready to burst, an explosion of starlings seen from the shore that mimic the quick motion of steam up from the sink that obfuscate the hedgerows disappearing in the dusk before both are forgotten, a motion of matter departicularizing into the undiscernible, a smashing of idols, a filtering out of photons, a Heraclitan stream of one shape saying no, and then many shapes saying no, no, no. A day in which the shape of another day fits perfectly, like a you-sized disguise of you, your own face covered by this face, alike any other you know but haven't seen, like the faces in the hedgerows you can no longer discern. A blank like any other, like the day we went to that store in the thawing snow, but that store was closed, the shafts of sunlight finding their way beneath the bridge, the highway that spanned the river, astonished the roofs and gutters. The whole day was revealed as the day that other days had only been the placeholder for, so that even when we went back out into the light and the familiar territory, it was new, a familiarity that had not happened before. Gnomehog means ship, or God, or maybe ship and God, or maybe Godship, a magic that crosses water. No one knows that, or even if they guarded the abandoned village in the time before it was abandoned. But at least there are songs about it. Songs of smashed idols that might just have been cracked cars, or just abandoned ships that sing, I was from where I was from until I was from somewhere else. I used to wear a smock that was ever renewed and came through near the wreckage, came through the near wreckage, near came through the wreckage, came near through the wreckage. It was all and it was all around me. The unseasonable around me, the music, and it was all and it was without measure. It was all, occasionally it made me feel empathy for a creature perceived to be weaker than oneself. A creature nearly come through the wreckage, but the wreckage meant it could not be measured. The music, the house, the mouse in the humane trap, who is the same mouse who was in the humane trap before, but looks different each time, or is a different mouse who looks the same each time, like the school shooter just now, who looks like the school shooter then, the face that will stay, wanting to not stay, a shape that says no, 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 forever in a Heraclitan stream of bullets. He looks like the last like any other you would see before becoming the like any other you never thought you'd be. If you don't take a mouse over a body of water, or over a major highway, it will return home, as it were, to what you call your home, or wherever you have not abandoned yet. And so you really have been taking the same mouse to the abandoned landfill if you won't cross the water in the ship of whatever God you wish to be. The doctor can't comment on the ages of the victims, or the prognosis of the wounded. The plain, answerable questions put on dumb show to keep us from the unanswerable. How it is that someday wreckage graduates to ruin. The arms of the woman gesticulating on the playground obscure her face, hands open and closed like birds trapped in hedgerows, reach out to touch the human form not fully in the frame, that cannot be discerned, seeking a shape that will say, yes. And then, missing Garrett. I haven't looked at David. I've got the proofs. When you sent the proofs, you sent the whole journal, and I was like, God, so many things I want to look at. You know, it's like I can't wait to read David's.
Gave you too quick of a deadline.
To read David's article about Garrett. Lines composed on Amtrak after hearing Garrett is gone. A lone swan swans up the river at Old Saybrook. The last bit of snow slithers between fall and flurry. Light rolls above our heads. Stars and the reflections of stars. Headlights and the reflections of headlights merge in the glass. And below, the Quinnebog River gone pointless. Thick crust of ice in the shallows, some mud or other rage below the surface. See the light, the other light, is come to join your light. Another world illuminated. Still, it's hard to see night creeping into mystic. Orange and yellow earth movers, a fading gleam in winter twilight. Tonka trucks tearing up the soluble polished. You lie in state at Stage Fort Park. Your voice the milk of stars, a passage opening in the thicket. The moon's mouth, a door to the infinite. The route, the way, the map of the way. I think I'll close with this one. So the girl before, I call it girl before her mirror, but it's girl before a mirror. It's the Picasso painting. I wrote down girl before her mirror and I just kept it. Entanglement and spooky action, or spooky action at a distance, are physics principles that have to do with the things that are sort of left out of Einstein's conception of the universe, of why it is that something in one place seems to be able to affect things in other places. And I don't know. That's probably entanglement at solstice. In one city, light fades. The light is fading to reveal the darkness on the day that is the longest day. And it's your last chance to play the chess master who will beat you in the time it takes to divide an hour for the second time by 60, as Sumerians did, and so now, so do you, divide the hour into superior highly composite numbers. And the tablet and the eye are two sides of a triangle, and the third side is the shape of a lightning bolt seen at dusk on the longest day, is the shape of Coltrane's tenor looming, lashing from the speakers, is the shape of a decision to take down the mobile of the girl before her mirror, the decision to become entangled in the last thing that was in the room before you moved in, 3D display faded with the sun, morning sun in that room, the face and the reflected face replicated on both sides and strung out across the chopstick-sized level plane like rabbits strung on a hunter's line. In one city, the mobile of the painting is thrown away, a print of which hung in the apartment in another city near where the original girl before her mirror hung, and that print then moved to another city near where the original girl before her mirror was painted, a city in which the light shows us that we are the imperfect recollection of light, shadows that show where light wished to be but failed. On the longest day, the last light dapples the bare shoulders of the chess masters that cannot cling or wait to suss out the queen's wind in the time it takes to divide an hour for the second time by 60. And on the longest day, a girl wanders among the masters with the girl before her mirror on her t-shirt, the day you threw away a mobile you failed to throw away before, or were unable but did in the time it takes to divide the hour for the second time by 60, of a painting you neither care for nor hate. And on that day you can peel a yellow sticky from a compact disc with impressions, spiritual, Brasilia, scrawled on it, and something unreadable in a hand you recognize as your own, a hand no longer yours that made cuneiform on a slipshod yellow sticky. Brasilia is a fake capital. Brazier's a famous doll. Brothers, Jerusalem is ours. Or was that an artificial capital, stuffed into an envelope containing a goodbye note that was carried from a city that was increment to a city that was avalanche, in a folder of postcards, New Orleans, Cairo, Caravaca, where I was once the Marquis, and a picture of you, who are always making something out of nothing, with the writer of a different goodbye note, and a picture of Sonny Sharrock and Alice Coltrane. You can peel a yellow sticky off a CD, and the particles of glue cascade in the air like tufts of incense from a thurible. The particles of glue, the visible and the invisible too, the smallest particles, smaller than the depth of the song's impressions, spiritual, Brasilia, first assembled at the village vanguard as particles of sound in a different increment of the city, where they reassembled on a CD where John Coltrane boomed and lashed from the speakers in the apartment where the printed girl before her mirror hung. In this city, the chess masters pack up the plastic boards because it is getting dark. The piece is hard to distinguish. Each unrepeatable set of human foibles become the seeming same, no longer parts of the whole, their movement unintelligible, their action spooky. The girl with the girl before her mirror on her shirt disintegrating in the parting light, the particles of which are like so much of your own life, scrawled into something unreadable, in a hand you recognize as no longer yours, the hand of a person who could not answer why we cling to this and not to that, and why we divide the hour into 60 and then again for a second time, and not another number and then again for a second time. or why this city on the longest day, cracked by perfect lightning, lets you throw away and crumble the glue that entangled you, both close up and at a distance.
Thanks, John. Let me just say a couple more things and then, if I may. Thanks, John. There's a lot more in spoke 6. We've got this year 273, 281 pages of work. As Michael said, we built this as the spoke review. I don't know if you've seen Netflix, but the Rolling Thunder review from 1976 has now come out as a film, and it was a different band of folks going to a different town at different times. Today's the first one of the spoke review. We'll be doing a bunch of these. We're going to do one on December 12th at the Grolier Poetry Bookshop. That'll feature John again, David Blair, who's here, who's in this issue. Who else is going to be at that one? Danielle Legros Georges, who we mentioned. Amanda Cook will be reading some of these letters to Maximus.
She read those here.
She read those here.
A bunch of them here.
Yeah, a
Excellent.
couple weeks ago.
And she was just at Harvard and out of Western Mass as well. It's turning into a major piece of work. It's
Yeah,
astonishing.
we have about 30 pages of them here, but she keeps going. On the 12th, we'll also have Kim Garcia, who's a great poet we're excited to have here, and yeah, I think that's who's on the December 12th bill. Oh, and Philip Nikolaev, who will be reading some of his Russian poetry, and we'll be doing just a Russian poetry spoke review at the Russia Center at Harvard after that. But if any of you are running a reading series or anything like that, we'll bring the spoke review to you if you'd like us to. I really encourage everybody to come here not next week, in a couple weeks to see Martha Collins. She's a poet that I've almost known as long as I've known John, but I also met her through poetry when I had a magazine in the 90s called Compost. A great poet named Kevin Bowen had just the Clinton administration had released all these captured documents from the Vietnam War of the prisoners and or actually not really prisoners. When the U.S. would go in to a village, before we would kill everybody in napalm, we would take all of the documents out of every soldier's pockets. Because who knows, maybe we'd have the map of the Ho Chi Minh Trail or something like that in there. And what's fascinating is that in almost every single one of these was a poem to a loved one. And Kevin Center at the time, well, still Center over there, thanks a lot to his efforts at pushing it, called the William Joyner Center for the Study of War and Social Consequences, published an incredible book called Poems for Captured Documents. Poems from captured documents that we were, in a different magazine I had at the time, we published them before they came out. And in 1995, we were the first magazine in the United States to ever publish the poems from North Vietnam, which I was shocked about. We would have, even in 1995 when we came out with that issue, we would give readings here in the city of the People's Republic of Boston and Cambridge, and people would protest. They would come to our readings and try to stop the readings because we were reading these crazy communist poems. But that's how I met Martha. She's a great friend of Kevin Bowen's and the Joyner Center and the writers' workshops that they've had there. And she did these incredible translations of one of Vietnam's greatest poets, Nguyen Quang Cho. And we found out that we had a mutual friend that we really loved that she had known for a long time, a poet named Joseph DeRoche, who, anyone here knew Joseph?
I didn't know him. I know of him.
You know of him. So yeah, not many people knew Joseph. He was a member of Robert Lowell's Little Workshop, a friend and correspondent of Sylvia Plath and Anne Sexton, and a professor from 1964-ish, 5 to till about 2011, 2012. And Northeastern University sprouted all sorts of poets, but sort of quiet. He was very active in the 1960s and 70s in the poetry movement here, but wasn't very extroverted about this stuff. Never sent his poems out that much. Would only give a reading if somebody asked him. And he made me as a literary executor, which I did with great honor. But then I found out that he also was a little bit of a Luddite, and he didn't have any of this stuff on a hard drive. And so it took me and some other folks about 5 years to type them all into a book. And and Gloria over at Savina Barba Press this year published the collected poems of Joseph DeRoche, which we call ceremonial entries. And I was honored to have Martha co-edit the book with me and write an incredible introduction, because she knew him much longer than I had, and was very intimate with him. And she's got a great introduction in here. And I've got a couple copies of this too. I really encourage you to get this. Somerville is just burgeoning with all sorts of stuff, because these folks are here in town. You folks are doing this. There's some poetry party at a warehouse in a couple weeks. I got to move to Somerville. So I thanks everybody for coming to the spoKe review. If you want to see the next spoKe review, it's December 12th. I've got a couple copies of all of these here, but now to tell you the secret. We finished the issue on Sunday night, but we only have 2 copies of the current one here with us, because that's just the way small presses work. We'll have them next week, but you can go to our webpage and you can order a copy of the new one now. Our webpage, or two. www.massspoke, with 3 S's, mass as in Massachusetts, spoke as in spoke, .webmail.com. So thanks so much for hosting us, Michael, and thanks everybody for coming.
Thank you all. You should also take a moment, this is the last month for the show that's up right now, which is the work of the poet Robert Duncan and his companion Jess. It's the centenary of Robert Duncan this year. So they've had this up since, I guess, last March when we did the tribute in here. But there's all sorts of goodies we're running around, so take a look if you've got some time. And if you would fold up your chairs, I would love you. And then we have time. You haven't got to go anywhere. There's still wine, bread, chips. Please help yourself. Thanks for coming. Did you sign this?